Thank you so much, Madhu, for your kind introduction. And very good evening, my dear professional colleagues. This is Dr. Sepuri Krishnamohan. I'm an endocrinologist. I have my own center, Sepuri Diabetes and Endocrine Center, Karnool. So today I'm going to talk about the combination of the fixed dose combinations of the SGLT2 inhibitor, that is the empagliflozin, and the DPP4 inhibitor, the linagliptin per se. So I would like to introduce this. There's some sort of introductory part of this particular topic. As you are all well aware that the SGLT2 inhibitors are the novel drugs in the armamentarium of the treatment of type 2 diabetes. And to start with, way back in 2013, the US FDA gave clearance to and approval to canagliflozin, and followed by the empagliflozin and the dapagliflozin. These three are available in our country, and the Cana got approval in the year 2013, whereas the EMPA and DAPA got the approval from US FDA in 2014 actually. And later on there are certain gliflozins have been approved by this particular US FDA which are not available in India, like ertugliflozin from EMERC and the sotagliflozin and ipragliflozin, and there are several in the pipeline to come. And these are the very novel drugs which lower the blood glucose by acting through the kidneys. Actually it inhibits the SGLT2 inhibitors which are present at the proximal convoluted tubules of the kidney, and to some extent the SGLT1 inhibition is also there, but the SGLT1 receptors are present in the proximal striate tubules. But the main mechanism of action of the gliflozins, so-called the SGLT2 inhibitors, otherwise known as the gliflozins, they act via inhibiting the SGLT2 receptors, which are present in the proximal convoluted tubules, and in turn they increase the excretion of the glucose through urine, and it decreases the reabsorption of the glucose from the kidneys into the body. So roughly around some 80 to 120 grams of glucose is being excreted through urine by these gliflozins in a given period of 24 hours. And this is the mechanism why the gliflozins, they reduce the body weight also to a tune of 4 to 5 kilos in a span of 4 to 5 months actually. So to emerge, the SGLT2 inhibitors have emerged like glucose lowering agents. So they just belonged in way back in 2013 and 14 to our domain, either the endocrine domain or the physician domain or the clinician domain who treats this particular type 2 diabetes. And later on, based on the cardiovascular outcome trials, they have shown to be very beneficial in the prevention and the decreased incidence of the 3-point MACE, as well as the heart failure and the protection of kidney, and several mechanisms of action. They're reducing the cardiometabolic renal continuum. So thereby the importance of SGLT2 inhibitors is being recognized by the cardiologists and the nephrologists, and not only by the endocrinologists. And with that introduction, I would like to just get into my topic today. So this is called the legacy meets, LEGACY. This is nothing but the linagliptin plus empagliflozin for glucometabolic benefits and optimum cardiorenal risk reduction in your patients. And this is the evidence-based optimization of empagliflozin plus linagliptin fixed dose combination in the patients suffering from type 2 diabetes mellitus. And this slide very clearly shows that the major problem globally is the uncontrolled blood sugars. That is the main parameter. We take it as like the glycosylated hemoglobin. That is the uncontrolled HbA1c is a major concern globally. So the A1C is the sum of the fasting plasma glucose and the postprandial plasma glucose. So these three are called the fasting as well as the post glucose, and the HbA1c are called the glycemic triad actually. So according to the Discover study, you can see that on the left hand side on top of that you can see a table where it shows the green stands for the A1C of.
Slides are not moving.
Pardon?
Slides are not moving, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry. Slides are not moving. No, there is a problem. Slides are not moving. No, no, here it is moving. Is it moving or not? Please, can any one of you respond?
No, sir. It is not moving.
Yeah. Just there is some technical glitch. We'll sort it out. Please kindly bear with us. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, slides are short. Start at share screen. Yes. Sir, slides are sharing, sir. Request from please audience. Request from please wait. Slides are sharing.
Are the slides moving, please?
Sir, no, sir.
No.
Still,
Oh, okay. We'll sort it out. No problem.
భాష ఒకసారి స్టాప్ చేసి మళ్ళీ షేర్ చేయవా స్క్రీన్
Yes, sir. Yeah, sorry for the technical glitch, my dear friends. Kindly bear with the technical glitch, please. We'll restore everything to normalcy, okay?
Okay, sir.
Yeah. So this slide clearly shows that the uncontrolled HbA1c is a major concern globally, not only in India, but in India it's a biggest problem. So according to on the left hand side, you can see from the Discover study program, it is divided into 4 categories actually. The green is the A1C that is less than 7%, and the yellow that is from 7 to 7.9%, and the orange is 8 to 8.9, and the brick red or the dark red is the HbA1c above or around 9%. So you can clearly see that only 17% of the type 2 population attained a target of A1C of less than 7, and that too, that is very meager in Southeast Asian population, that is especially our Indian population. It is only 13% were able to reach to the target, and globally 27% of the patients, they had an A1C of around or more than 9%, and the highest proportions in Southeast Asia, that is India and Indonesia, that is more than 36% had an A1C of more than 9%. And you come to the right hand side, you find the bar diagram, and this is taken from the landmark trial, the UKPDS, the United Kingdom Prospective Diabetes Study, that is 49. The glycemic control tends to decline over time with monotherapy, and the drugs taken in that particular, taken up in that study were the metformin, the glibenclamide, and the insulin at that time, way back in 1977. So you can very clearly see that after 3 years, after 6 years, after 9 years, with metformin, the percentage of the patients achieving the glycemic control after 3 years is 44%. After 6 years, it has come down to 34%, and after the end of 9 years, only 13% were able to come to normalcy adequately with only metformin. No other OHA other than metformin, that is the monotherapy. You all are aware that as a protocol, as a recommendation, we all tend to start the management of type 2 diabetes mellitus with diet and exercise, and to start with metformin as a protocol, unless otherwise that particular molecule is either contraindicated or not tolerated by the patient. So then you can add the other oral agents that are present at your disposal. So coming to the next slide. So to worsen the sequential treatment approach is often compounded by the substantial clinical inertia to timely treatment intensification, and on the y-axis you can see the duration of the diabetes, and on the y-axis you can see the HbA1c, on the x-axis you can see the duration of diabetes. See, to start with the OAD monotherapy and the OAD combination, later on OAD uptitration, later on OAD plus basal insulin, later on OAD plus multiple daily insulin injections, and you can see the A1C, it has never touched the normalcy of 7, it is all the time above, it is in between 9 and 7.5. So the best way is to go for the intensive control of the type 2 diabetes mellitus, that is to take away the inertia, maybe the therapeutic inertia, maybe the clinical inertia, maybe the clinician's inertia or the patient's inertia, whatever it may be. See, from diet and exercise, you start the OAD monotherapy and the combination very early, so that the HbA1c has dropped down to 6.5, and you can uptitrate the OAD dose, and if it is required you can add the basal insulin to the existing OADs, and if it is not working you can go for the multiple daily doses of insulin injections along with the existing OADs. So thereby you can achieve a good glycemic control which decreases the incidence of the complications. And as you are all aware, even 1% rise in the HbA1c is associated with many clinical complications and hazards of type 2 diabetes. So we have to be very meticulous as far as controlling the fasting plasma glucose and the postprandial, and put together the A1C must be around or less than 7. If in case the patient is young and is able to they withhold the hypoglycemic episodes, you keep a tight control like from 6.5 to 7. And if it is an elderly patient who is not able to tolerate hypoglycemia, nowadays we don't welcome hypoglycemias, so you can put the A1C range around or less than 7. So this slide shows the impact of early or late intensification of glucose lowering therapy in patients with type 2 diabetes. This is the global Discover study, and this is a bar diagram showing you the light blue shows the early intensification of the treatment, and the yellow shows the late intensification, and on the x-axis you can see the duration and the number of the patients after 6 months, after 12 months, after 2 years, after 3 years, and on the y-axis you can see the proportion of the patients with HbA1c of less than 7% during the follow-up. You can very clearly see that all the time the early intensification group is able to achieve to the normalcy in a larger proportions of the patients. Like after 6 months, the early intensification which reached the A1C to the target is 72.8 and 31.7 the late intensification respectively, and after 12 months it is 69.5 and 33.7 respectively, and after 24 months it is 66.1 and 35.4 respectively, and after 3 years it is 61.8 and 37.9 respectively. And the learnings from this particular the global Discover study is early diagnosis and timely intensification of glucose lowering treatment is important for achieving long-term glycemic control, thereby improving the clinical outcomes. And now the funda of treating the diabetes per se, the type 2 diabetes, is hit hard, hit early is the funda. All the time remember, hit hard, hit early. So at the beginning itself you start with lifestyle modification and the early intensification that is going to fetch you in the long run in preventing the complications, either the microvascular complications or the macrovascular complications, with special reference to the microvascular complications which are totally glycemic dependent. And factors associated with increased rate of disease progression. The major factors of diagnosis influencing diabetes progression are higher HbA1c, younger age, higher body mass index, lower HDLC, that is good cholesterol, and the increased triglycerides. These are the major factors influencing the diabetes progression. And you can very clearly see that HbA1c at diagnosis is one of the main determinants of the diabetes progression. So each 1% increase in the A1C leads to the beta cell stress by 3.8%. The increased beta cell stress by 3.8%. So this eventually causes the per annum death rate is around 4%. The pancreatic functioning beta cells, the death rate is 4% per annum, and within no time, within period of 5 to 6 years, it becomes 25%. And as a rule of thumb, by the time you diagnose the type 2 diabetes, 50% of the functioning beta cells are dead, and only the remaining 50% are functioning, and the annual decline is death rate is 4%, and after a period of 5 to 6 years, eventually it becomes 75%. Non-functioning beta cell reserve is more than 75%, and once it reaches the 75%, no OAD is going to act, and it is not able to get back to the blood glucose levels to the target. So the patient inevitably reaches a state called pancreatic bankruptcy, and he has to be put on insulin for the rest of the life. And the latest theory proposed by my mentor Ralph Anthony DiFranco, he has postulated a new hypothesis that by the time you diagnose a case of type 2 diabetes, more than 80% of the beta cells are dead. So that is the reason why we need to be very, very fast, very early, hit hard, hit early while treating type 2 diabetes mellitus. Before the patient reaches the stage of pancreatic bankruptcy, you must be able to get back to the normalcy. See, the initial period is very crucial because this is called the legacy effect. The patient in the first decade of the type 2 diabetes phase is well controlled. There is a phenomena called legacy effect which is being carried forward, and the patient is less likely to get into complications in the future decades in the long run. And at the same time, on the right hand side, you can see every 1% reduction in the A1C is associated with reduced risk of the myocardial infarction by 14%, the heart failure by 16%, and the microvascular complications per se, the diabetic kidney disease and the diabetic retinopathy and the diabetic neuropathy by 37%. Because I have told you earlier, the microvascular complications are totally the glycemic dependent. So if you can reduce A1C by 1%, you can prevent the microvascular complications by 37%. So if you can just get back from 10 of A1C to 7 A1C, I think you can almost prevent the microvascular infections. But whereas when it comes to the macrovascular complications like the myocardial infarction and the stroke and the peripheral vascular disease, they are to some extent glycemic dependent. There are multiple factors involved in it, like diabetes, the hypertension, the dyslipidemia, the smoking, the lipoprotein little a, the obesity, the sedentary lifestyle, and so many, the environmental pollution. So many things are the genetic factors. So many things are involved in the disease causation of this macrovascular disease. The per se the myocardial infarction, or the stroke, or the peripheral vascular disease, or the PAD, peripheral arterial disease. So let us look at a patient of type 2 diabetes uncontrolled who is on only metformin, and the presenting complaints are the 49-year-old male patient is got type 2 diabetes for the last 2 years, and he's got comorbidities like hypertension and dyslipidemia also. His blood pressure is 138/82 milligrams of mercury, which is on the higher side actually as per the latest recommendations. The diabetes, the type 2 diabetes, whatever it may be, the blood pressure target is less than 120 or 130 of systolic and less than 80 of diastolic millimeters of mercury, and his body mass index is 28.5 kilograms per meter square. According to our Indian guidelines, he falls into the category of obesity actually. Anything that crosses 27.5 according to the Indian guidelines, it falls under the category of obesity. Again, obesity is divided to grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and according to the Western classification, this falls under the category of overweight, because from 25 to 29.9 they call it overweight, and once it touches 30 and above it is called obese. And let us come to his medication history. He is taking metformin 500 mg BD, initiated after 3 months of lifestyle management. This is a point to be noted. So this patient was put on lifestyle management after the diagnosis for 3 months. And when it is not controlled, he was put on 500 mg of metformin twice a day, one in the morning, in the night. And the dose was increased to 1000 milligram BD 6 months back when the A1C was 8.3%. So this is the classical example of what I said, the early intensification and the late intensification. So this is a case of late intensification, and the medication currently on the metformin 1000 milligram BD, and for his hypertension he is taking amlodipine 5 milligram plus telmisartan 40 milligram once a day, and the rosuvastatin 20 milligram once a day. So he is taking medicine for his diabetes, hypertension, and for his dyslipidemia. And the current laboratory results, the HbA1c is 8.6, it is definitely on the higher side. Fasting is 165 milligram per deciliter, definitely on the higher side. As per the latest even 2022 American Diabetes Association guidelines, the goal of fasting plasma glucose is from 80 to 130 milligram per deciliter. So in that context, it is on the very higher side. When coming to this particular postprandial glucose, it is 280 milligram per deciliter, which is also very high according to the latest 2022 ADA guidelines. The cutoff is less than 180 milligram per deciliter. So it is 100 points extra. And coming to the cholesterol LDLC, it is 120 milligram per deciliter. As per the recommendations, the latest recommendations of the American Diabetes Association, the standards of care for diabetes, the LDLC for type 2 diabetes without any complications, the target is it should be around or less than 100 milligram per deciliter, whereas this gentleman is running 120 milligram per deciliter of LDLC, that is bad cholesterol. And the estimated glomerular filtration is 73 ml per minute bar, 1.73 meter square. It is quite good, okay. So all the time, please make it a habit to calculate the estimated glomerular filtration rate, and just don't go by the serum creatinine, which is a very decisive parameter. So go to the Play Store, you can download several EGFR calculated formulas, and the best is the EPI CKD modified 2009 is the best. That's what I follow on in my OPD on daily basis. So once you stage this, this gentleman is already in stage 2 chronic kidney disease. Anything that is above 90 to 120 is stage 1, and above 120 is normal, and anything in between 60 to 89, that is stage 2, and stage 3 is again divided into stage 3A and B. Stage 3A is from 45 to 59. Stage 3B is from 30 to 44. And stage 4 is from 15 to 29. And any EGFR below 15 ml per minute is considered end stage renal disease or end stage kidney disease, the ESRD or the ESKD. So now the question of the combination therapy comes. When to initiate a combination therapy? For that we have got several references. According to American Diabetes Association 2021 and even 2022 also says the absolute effectiveness of most oral medications rarely exceeds 1%. So then initiate a combination therapy. According to the ADA 2021 it says initial combination therapy in patients presenting with HbA1c of 1.5 to 2% above the target, and according to the ACE and the AACE, that is American College of Endocrinology and the American Association for the Clinical Endocrinologists 2020 says the entry HbA1c around or more than 7.5 to 9%, you have to consider either dual or triple therapy. It very clearly says the A1C is in between 7.5 and 9. Start with either 2 drugs or 3 drugs. And if it crosses 9, you have to initiate insulin. So coming to the RSSDI, our own body, the Research Society for the Study of Diabetes in India, along with the ESI, that is Endocrine Society of India 2020, what it says is, consider initiating combination therapy if the HbA1c is more than 1.5% above the target. That's what it says. If the target is somewhere around the target is 7 and it is 8.5, it says go for combination therapy, either dual therapy or the triple therapy. And after 9 of A1C, it is mandatory that one should go for insulin. Insulin can be used along with the existing OADs or alone also. And this slide shows the possible effects of combinations and the cardiometabolic risk factors. And this oval shape, egg shaped, this thing shows the combination of metformin plus sulfonylurea on the right hand top. And the blue one, light blue one, is the overlapping that particular oval is the metformin plus DPP4 inhibitor. And the green one, which encircles the everything, is a combination of metformin and an SGLT2 inhibitor and a DPP4 inhibitor. This is the very ideal triple drug therapy to start with, because it has got significant weight reduction as well as the blood pressure reduction. I have told you in the introduction itself, and the powerful and early efficacy and the very low risk of hypoglycemia, and on the other hand the cardiovascular and the renal benefits and the safety evidence of individual components. That's what I told you, the cardio-metabolic renal continuum. That's what it's going to lower the blood glucose, the SGLT2 inhibitor as well as this particular combination of metformin and DPP4, the triple combination is going to take care of the many aspects, like it's going to, as far as our concern is the lowering the blood glucose, it lowers the nocturnal blood glucose, so it's a very good drug of choice for nocturnal hypertension, and it controls the daytime hypertension. On top of it, it controls 24-hour BP control. Thereby, it's a very good drug of choice in cases of resistant hypertension, along with the antihypertensive therapies, and it significantly reduces the body weight. And with low hypoglycemia and with the cardiovascular benefits, that is with regards to the reduction in the incidence of 3-point MACE, that is cardiovascular death, non-fatal MI and non-fatal stroke, and it decreases the incidence of the heart failure and the hospitalization for heart failure. These are the benefits with this particular the empagliflozin on the heart. And when it comes to the kidney, it preserves the kidney function by decreasing the serum creatinine and increases the estimated glomerular filtration rate. So these are the cardiometabolic and the renal risk factors which are solved by this particular the SGLT2, the empagliflozin, and put together with metformin and the DPP4 inhibitor, it has got a synergistic effect actually. So now you can see the classical picture which is in the box, that is called the Arminus octet, which is postulated by my own mentor Ralph Anthony DiFranco. So the defect is at 8 places according to Ralph Anthony DiFranco. The hyperglycemia begets hyperglycemia, and what causes hyperglycemia is you can see from different the decreased insulin secretion from this particular the pancreas, and the alpha cell islet which secretes the glucagon is cause for hyperglycemia, and the increased hepatic glucose production from liver causes hyperglycemia, and the neurotransmitter dysfunction at the brain causes hyperglycemia, and the decreased glucose uptake from the muscle also causes hyperglycemia, and the increased glucose reabsorption from the kidneys causes hyperglycemia, and at the level of fat, the increased lipolysis causes hyperglycemia, and at the level of gastrointestinal tract, the decreased incretin effect is the cause for hyperglycemia. So put together, this is called the Arminus octet of the pathophysiology of type 2 diabetes mellitus, and you can clearly see the drugs which can modify the disease process, the Arminus octet. As far as the fat is concerned, the thiazolidinediones, that is the pioglitazone and the metformin, are the best drugs. At the level of GI tract, the incretin therapy is nothing but the GLP-1 receptor agonist, that is glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor agonist. These are all injectable anti-hyperglycemic drugs, and of late the one molecule that has come from the basket of Novo Nordisk is this particular semaglutide, that is oral semaglutide, which is available in our country also in the strengths of 3 milligram and 7 milligram and 14 milligram. The first of its kind, all are injectables. They have injectable once a week semaglutide also. We have got liraglutide from the basket of Novo Nordisk. We have dulaglutide once a week. And the pancreas, the decreased insulin secretion can be countered by sulfonylureas and the thiazolidinediones, the pioglitazone, and the DPP4 inhibitors and the GLP-1 receptor agonists. And at the level of islet cells, and the increased glucagon secretion can be well countered by GLP-1 receptor agonists and the DPP4 inhibitors. And at the level of liver, the increased hepatic glucose production can be well encountered with the pioglitazone and the metformin and the GLP-1 receptor agonists. And at the level of brain, it is the GLP-1 receptor and the DPP4 inhibitor and the bromocriptine. We use bromocriptine sometimes, not on daily basis. And at the level of muscle, where the decreased glucose uptake is there, the drugs of choice which reduce that, this is the reason for insulin resistance actually, the increased insulin resistance leading to the decreased improve in insulin sensitivity, that is well countered by the pioglitazone and the metformin and the GLP-1 receptor agonist. And at the level of kidney, the increased glucose reabsorption can be well addressed by the SGLT2 inhibitors, as I have told you in the introduction itself. So this is and on the left hand side you can see effect on 8/8 pathophysiological aspects of aminous octet when added to metformin. This is the things that is go series of the things that happen, that the hyperglycemia is well taken and you can achieve euglycemia. And now coming to the compelling reasons to initiate empagliflozin plus linagliptin FDC, that is fixed dose combination. It is available in the dose of empagliflozin 10 bar linagliptin 5 or empagliflozin 25 bar linagliptin 5 as next line therapy in patients with type 2 diabetes inadequately controlled on metformin. And now you can see the complementary effect of this particular SGLT2 inhibitors and the DPP4 inhibitors. Like you can see on the A1C from 9, it has come to 8, it has come to 7.5, it has come to 6.5 also, with addition of with addition of the SGLT2 inhibitor and DPP4 to the existing metformin actually. So never forget that metformin is there from the beginning. It is there. Only thing is, see, metformin has got a complementary effect with the SGLT2 inhibitors and the DPP4 inhibitors, and the SGLT2 inhibitors have got a complementary effect with the DPP4 inhibitors, and vice versa. So at an A1C of 8% to 8.5, HbA1c lowering is slightly greater with DPP4 inhibitors than SGLT2 inhibitors as an add-on to metformin, and SGLT2 inhibitors are associated with larger A1C improvements than DPP4 inhibitors at higher HbA1c levels. In cases of HbA1c of around or more than 8%, dual DPP4 and SGLT2 inhibitors add-on therapy to metformin should be considered to help more patients achieve glycemic targets. So this is so far the best, the triple drug combination is adding SGLT2 plus DPP4 to the metformin, that is going to achieve glycemic control in majority of the cases. The greatest advantage is you lower the blood glucose, you lower the blood pressure, you lower the weight with very, very insignificant hypoglycemias, especially no nocturnal L3 hypoglycemia, that is level 3 hypoglycemia, where the patient gets, that is serious hypoglycemic episodes are very much prevented by this combination. Now, early achievement of goal and durability of action. This is on metformin background. You can add empagliflozin 25 bar Lina 5 or the EMPA 10 milligram plus Lina 5 or the empagliflozin 25 alone, empagliflozin 10 milligram alone and linagliptin 5 milligram alone. And now you can see that even at 8% baseline of HbA1c, only FDC arm could reach the target HbA1c, and the HbA1c reduction was sustained up to 52 weeks in patients with uncontrolled who are on metformin. You can see, you can see this in the bar diagram. Further HbA1c reduction in patients with baseline A1c of around or more than 8.5%. You can very clearly see that the greatest reductions in the A1c are seen with the empagliflozin 25 milligram plus linagliptin 5 milligram to the tune of the 1.84 percent reduction in the A1C. That is the maximum with this combination 25 by 5. Whereas EMPA 10 bar Lina 5 was able to reduce by 1.61, and whereas empagliflozin alone 25 was able to reduce the A1C by 1.22%, 10 milligram by 1.29, and the linagliptin alone by 0.99 respectively. And the primary clinical concerns and the optimization of the empagliflozin and the linagliptin fixed dose combination. We take our case, okay. The 49-year-old male uncontrolled glycemia, A1C 8.6 on metformin 1000 BD, is obese. Yeah, according to the Indian guidelines, they have mentioned obese. Yes. Additional risk factors, we mentioned hypertension and dyslipidemia also. And when we take this particular body weight reduction, the BP reduction, and the serum uric acid reduction, I have already told you the greatest advantage of this particular SGLT2 inhibitor is that it reduces the body weight. See, alone empagliflozin 25 by Lina has reduced 3 kilos, and EMPA 10 bar Lina 5 has reduced by 2.6 kilograms. And in my clinical practice, I honestly tell you, I have seen 5 to 6 kilos of reduction within a period of 3 to 4 months with this particular molecule, either the empagliflozin or the dapagliflozin. And when it comes to the blood pressure reduction, I have told you it has got a significant reduction in the systolic blood pressure, where it is reduction by 3.6 millimeters of mercury, and with this particular the diastolic being 2.2. Whereas with the 10 bar 5, the systolic is 2.8, whereas the diastolic is 2.2. Systolic is very significant, though diastolic is also significant, but not to that significant as systolic actually. So, addition of this SGLT2 inhibitor to the treatment of type 2 diabetes is going to help the patient suffering from resistant hypertension and the nocturnal hypertension. So where the blood pressure is well controlled with the standard treatment along with the standard treatment for hypertension. And along with this body weight reduction, glucose reduction and the BP reduction, there is one more reduction, that is reductions in the serum uric acid. You can see it is able to reduce by 55.9 micromoles per liter, and whereas this particular 10 bar 5 was able to reduce by 60.7 micromoles of serum uric acid, which is a favorable effect where the gout is associated with hypothyroidism. Hyperuricemia is always associated with either hypothyroidism or type 2 diabetes, or vice versa. Type 2 diabetes is associated with hypothyroidism or hyperuricemia, and hypothyroidism is associated with hyperuricemia and type 2 diabetes. This is a triangle: hyperuricemia, hypothyroidism and the type 2 diabetes. They always coexist. And again coming to this, our patient, the other safety concerns, despite the high efficacy, no increased risk of hypoglycemia with EMPA and Lina FDC. This is a point to be highlighted. We welcome the drugs. Then any drugs to treat type 2 diabetes must have got the efficacy of lowering the glucose. At the same time, it should not produce hypoglycemia. These are the qualities we expect from any molecule. So you can see very less incidence of hypoglycemia with empagliflozin 25 with linagliptin 5 milligram, like it is 1.8, and EMPA 10 and Lina it is 1.1, whereas EMPA 25 alone with incidence of 2.2 of hypoglycemia, and EMPA 10 also 2.2, and Lina 5 milligram 1.5 respectively. So lower incidence of genital tract infections with empagliflozin and linagliptin fixed dose combination. See, so far I have told you the where to use this particular SGLT2 inhibitors, but at the same time it's my responsibility as a speaker to tell you where not to use this SGLT2 inhibitors. So number one is when the patient is complaining of recurrent genitourinary infections, UTIs, or the monilial candidiasis, the vaginal candidiasis or vulvovaginal candidiasis, or the fungal infections in any form, that is one contraindication where you cannot go for this molecule. Recurrent, I said recurrent, remember that. And second thing is, when the patient is dehydrated, you should never initiate SGLT2 inhibitor, because already dehydrated patient leads to further dehydration with this particular SGLT2 inhibitor, because it has got a mechanism of action called osmotic diuresis, where the sodium is excreted and the patient gets into the dyselectrolytemia with dehydration, which leads to a condition called the euglycemic decay. The blood sugars will be perfectly normal, right? 140, 150, 160, but you test the urinary ketones or blood ketones, it will be positive. So that particular case where the patient is dehydrated, you cannot start. The one thing where you can where you start this particular combination in a normal patient, you just have to advise couple of things to the patient, that you have to maintain genitourinary hygiene, because this molecule has got a little bit incidence of increasing the genitourinary infections, including the candidial infections, and so you have to keep yourself adequately hydrated, because dehydration might precipitate with this particular molecule. So to prevent the euglycemic decay and dehydration, always ask the patient to get adequately hydrated by taking lot of fluids like buttermilk, ordinary like water, and even the ragi ganji and the lime and lemon water if it is not contraindicated. And you can see the incidence of the lower incidence of genitourinary tract infections with the FDC. Actually, you can see the EMPA with Lina 25 by 5, it is 4%, and the EMPA 10 milligram with 5, it is 4.4, and the EMPA 25 alone has got 6.5, and EMPA 10 6.5, and the Lina is 2.6. And the take home message here is addition of linagliptin to empagliflozin to some extent reduces the incidence of the genitourinary tract infections in patients using this particular empagliflozin. You can very clearly see this from this bar diagram. The alone EMPA is showing 25 or 10 is showing 6.5%, whereas with Lina it is 4% and 4.4% respectively. And the reason is still not known, but it is believed that the linagliptin, when clubbed with empagliflozin, it alters the pH of the genitalia actually, so that it reduces the bacterial infections as well as the fungal infections. This is believed to be that particular the cause is the alteration in the pH at the genitalia. And for our reference case, empagliflozin plus linagliptin fixed dose combination affords early and robust up to 1.8% HbA1c reduction from mean baseline of around or more than 8.5, significant weight and systolic blood pressure reduction, minimal risk of hypoglycemia and lower risk of genital tract infections. But is this enough? No. Now coming to the CV and renal outcomes from the respective cardiovascular outcome trials, the summary. When we take this, the empagliflozin, the EMPA-REG outcome and the linagliptin, the Carmelina, have shown that the ones in the green are like the beneficial effect. The ones in the yellow are like neutral. Like you take 3-point MACE. 3-point MACE is nothing but the cardiovascular death, the non-fatal stroke and the non-fatal MI. See, you can see that empagliflozin has got the beneficial effect on cardiovascular death and the hospitalization for heart failure and the kidney outcomes. Empagliflozin is very beneficial, whereas linagliptin, though not it is efficient or beneficial, it is neutral. It doesn't induce 3-point MACE. Linagliptin doesn't cause CV death. Linagliptin is not contraindicated in heart failure. Linagliptin has got good kidney outcomes when compared to the other gliptins, because linagliptin is the real renal gliptin. I endorse this linagliptin because at any point of diabetic kidney disease, starting from stage 1 to end stage kidney disease, that is stage 5, even during dialysis, even during the transplant, and even during the new onset of type 2 diabetes that emerges after the transplant, at any point of time, you don't need to titrate the dose of linagliptin. You start with 5 milligram, you stay with 5 milligram. This is the only one drug probably in the armamentarium of the type 2 diabetes management. Along with insulin, this can be used in any stage of the diabetic kidney disease, including the dialysis and the transplant and post-transplant also. That's the reason why I call it a real renal gliptin. All other gliptins, they need dose titration, down titration. Suppose you can take sitagliptin from 100, you have to come down to 50, you have to come down to 25. With the saxagliptin, you have to come down to 5 to 2.5. And there is one Indian gliptin, teneligliptin, that doesn't require any dose titration. But I don't consider it a good molecule because that has got a tendency to increase the QTC prolongation, whereby it leads to the arrhythmias, ventricular arrhythmias and sudden cardiac deaths. And it doesn't have any cardiovascular outcome trials like what linagliptin has got. Linagliptin has got 2 cardiovascular outcome trials. One is Carmelina and the second is Carolina. And empagliflozin has got robust studies like EMPA-REG outcome, and the Emperor preserved and the Emperor reduced in heart failure cases, and the EMPA kidney is, we are waiting for the results to roll out, and already EMPRISE has come. So we have got robust scientific evidence behind empagliflozin and linagliptin. And empagliflozin and linagliptin FDC is available in 2 different once daily doses. I have told you 10/5 and 25/5, and that can be taken regardless of food intake and at any time of the day you can take. The empagliflozin and linagliptin FDC should not be initiated and should be discontinued in patients with an EGFR persistently below 30 ml per minute per 1.73 meter square of the surface body area. See, only one contraindication I have told you earlier. Apart from that, the decreased renal, the renally compromised patients, that is below 30 means you can use it until 3B, but not 4 and 5. If it is less than 30 ml, you cannot initiate, or if the patient is on this particular empagliflozin or dapagliflozin, you have to stop it with immediate effect. So all the time, that's why I ask you always calculate this thing, like estimated glomerular filtration rate by just whether the patient is male or female, whether the race, the African American or the other, and the next thing is only the serum creatinine. This is all we want. And both empagliflozin and linagliptin are recommended for type 2 diabetes management of patients with cardiovascular disease and at risk of heart failure respectively. So the first international body that has come out with the recommendations way back in 2019, which said that irrespective of this metformin, whether the patient is on metformin or not, a newly detected type 2 diabetes patient can be put on either SGLT2 inhibitor or the GLP-1 receptor agonist if the patient is at risk of developing atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease or with established atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. This was given by the European Society of Cardiology way back in 2019. And later on, the European Association for the Study of Diabetes, EASD, has joined hands with the EAC, and a common consensus from European Society of Cardiology and the European Association for the Study of Diabetes in 2019 has come out with a common consensus that the newly diagnosed type 2 diabetes patients with or without metformin, the patient is at risk or with established atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, you have to start SGLT2 inhibitors if the heart failure predominates, and you have to start GLP-1 receptor agonist if 3-point MACE predominates, or a combination of both SGLT2 and GLP-1 receptor agonists to be on very, very safer side to prevent the atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease as well as the heart failures. And on the right hand side you can see the reduced cardiovascular events and the mortality. It is the class of recommendation is class 1. The recommendations are class 1 AB, class 2 AB, class 3 AB, and level of recommendation is A, B, C, D and E. A is 1. So the SGLT2 inhibitors are recommended to reduce the cardiovascular events. It is class 1A recommendation, that is the best recommendation, and empagliflozin recommended to reduce the risk of death, class 1B, and diabetes management treatment to reduce heart failure risk. The SGLT2 is recommended to lower the hospitalization for the heart failure risk. It is class 1A, and DPP4 inhibitors, sitagliptin and the linagliptin, may be considered class 2B. So these are the recommendations from the European Society of Cardiology 2019 on diabetes, pre-diabetes and cardiovascular diseases, developed in collaboration with the EASD. And the randomized control trial evidence with SGLT2 and the DPP4 fixed dose combinations, you can very clearly see this. We have got 2 US FDA approved combinations in our country. The one is empagliflozin with linagliptin from Boehringer, and the dapagliflozin plus saxagliptin from the AstraZeneca. You can very clearly see wherever there is a green, it is beneficial. Wherever yellow, it is neutral. wherever there is red, it should not be recommended. So when you take this, the empagliflozin based on the empiric outcome and the linagliptin based on the carbolina COVT, you can see it has got a beneficial role in reducing the risk of 3-point MACE, and the beneficial risk in then reducing the risk of cardiovascular death, and the hospitalization for the heart failure is reduced, and the renal parameters, the risk is reduced, and when coming to the liver, that is either the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or the NAFLD or the NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, these drugs may be given, whereas all the four, they are neutral with the linagliptin, that it is neutral, that it doesn't produce any damage to the 3-point MACE, cardiovascular death, hospitalization for heart failure, even the renal parameters, and the dosing is once daily. And when you take the second combination available in our country, the dapagliflozin with the declared TB58, the cardiovascular outcome trial, and the saxagliptin, that is Seva TB53. See, you can see it is neutral as far as 3-point MACE and cardiovascular death is concerned. And you have to make a note that saxagliptin induces heart failure, so it induces the risk of hospitalization for heart failure. So you should not use this combination in patients suffering from heart failure, because it worsens the condition and it increases the risk of hospitalization for heart failure. And the renal, the saxagliptin, the role is very uncertain, and this is also once daily. And coming to our the Indian gliflozin, that is remogliflozin from Glenmark, and they have got a combination, and remogliflozin has no cardiovascular outcome trial so far, even the vildagliptin also no COVT, but okay, this combination is there in our Indian market. So you can see this is not recommended, this is not recommended, whereas vildagliptin in heart failure, it increases the left ventricular volumes. So according to the VIVID study, VIVIDD study done by this particular European Society of Cardiology and European Association for the Study of Diabetes, which was done in 2019, that recommends that it increases, vildagliptin increases the left ventricular volumes, which is not a desirable effect, and it should not be used in heart failure. And even in this particular liver scenario, hepatic, either the NAFLD or the NASH, this is not recommended. And the greatest disadvantage is all these are once a day, but remogliflozin and the vildagliptin, they have to be taken twice a day. So coming to the benefits of empab or linagliptin combination, and the metabolic more than 1.8% reduction on higher baselines, and significant pleiotropic benefits of weight loss and BP reduction and serum uric acid reduction also. And on the CV perspective, the significant 3-point MACE and the very significant decrease in the cardiovascular death, and all-cause mortality, and the heart failure benefits with hospitalization for heart failure benefits with EMPA, and safety with Lina also. Coming to renal perspective, 39% of relative risk reduction of incident or worsening nephropathy in type 2 diabetes patients with established cardiovascular disease with EMPA, and 14% of... Can you please unmute yourself? Please, I request the participants to mute yourself. Please, kindly mute yourself. You are disturbing the session, please. Coming to the renal perspective, there is 14% relative risk reduction of progression to albuminuria in type 2 diabetes patients. So, from a glucocentric approach to holistic approach for our patients, it is a wonderful pleiotropic molecule, the empagliflozin, in combination with linagliptin, the fixed dose combination remains the best next option to metformin. And thank you so much for your patient listening. And once again, yeah, though there were some technical glitches, so for patient, yeah, any questions or queries, you please type and put it in the chat box so that I can take up all the questions, please.